Musician and guest speaker this morning is Imam Jamal Rahman, and he is not a guest in so many ways because he's very well known to our community, but again, we're blessed to have him here. He's one of the spiritual leaders of the Interfaith Church, and he's also one of the three amigos, the Interfaith Amigos, along with Rabbi Ted Falcon and Pastor Don McKenzie. And so please join me in giving a warm welcome to Jamal.
My dear friends, thank you so much for that very warm welcome. Such a joy and privilege to be here. In this holy month of Ramadan, it feels like I've come on a sacred pilgrimage. Let me start with this wonderful Mullah Nasruddin story, something you've heard before. The mullah is in the tavern, drinking and drinking and drinking. A little drunk. It's 4 in the morning, he stumbles out in the streets, and a policeman accosts him and says, "Sir, who are you? Where did you come from? Where are you going?" And the mullah says, "Sir, if I knew the answer to all those questions, I'd be home already." Now, as we always say before, every mullah story has many levels of meaning. Our life is a sacred pilgrimage, but it's steeped totally in mystery. We're all seekers. And all this talk about your theme this month, inner pilgrimage, the inner work, as also the outer work, is actually very, very irrelevant and even very inconvenient. And it makes us stuck in a robotic pattern of living. Islamic mystics say there are two veils, and we've talked about this before, that stand in the way. Health and wealth. Health is good, myself, my family members. Wealth, not just money, but also emotional security. All these things don't matter. Inner pilgrimage, outer pilgrimage. As Muslims say, polishing the heart so it reflects the face of Allah in it. Until, inevitably, one of those veils will shatter. Death of loved ones, cancer, divorce, upset in one's security. Then suddenly, deeper questions. Who am I? Where did I come from? Where am I going? What's the purpose of life? I want to get out of this robotic, stuck pattern. So, in Sufism, which is the heart of Islam, the spirituality of Islam, they ask us to just reflect on some verses. For example, there's a beautiful revelation that came to the Prophet Muhammad in a dream, where God says, "I was a secret treasure, and I longed to be known, and so I created you, and the worlds visible and invisible." Just be with that. Another verse that came to the Prophet Muhammad, where God says to each one of us, "Beloved one, between me and you there are no veils, but between you and me there are 70,000 veils." Or the 14th century poet Hafiz, if you remember, he says, "Let's keep all spiritual talk simple today. God is trying to sell you something, but you Jamal, you refuse to buy. This refusal to buy is your suffering. Your fantastic haggling. Your manic screaming about the price." Another one by Hafiz, "God revealed to me a sublime secret. God said, I am made whole by you. Each soul completes me." Or Rumi, who says, There is a kiss. There is a kiss we want all our lives. There's a kiss we want all our lives, a touch of spirit on the body. All this by way of saying, we slowly begin to realize life has a purpose. And if you look in the traditions, all the traditions say it's twofold. One is, can I awaken to who I really am? My divine spark, my Christ nature, Buddha nature, Elohim nature, Allah nature, Krishna nature. The other one is, can I be of service to God's creation? Can I be a lamp, a lifeboat, or a ladder? That is going to give me meaning, fulfillment in my life. And what is beautiful is they're both interconnected. This outer pilgrimage is a very strong function of the inner pilgrimage, the inner work. You know, not long ago, many years ago, I went to a Fetzer conference, and there was this very active African-American activist who said when he was young, 7, 8 years old, in school, a young white boy called him the N-word, and he slapped the child. When he came home, his father congratulated him. Son, you stood up for justice, you did what's right. But his mother took him aside and said, son, what good did that do? There has to be a better way. And those words, there has to be a better way, splashed in his heart. And he's an activist, and he says, whenever I see injustice, of course, I do what is right. I do what is right. But he follows the words of, say one mystic like Kabir from India, 16th, 17th century, who says, do what is right. Protect yourself. Don't allow yourself to be abused. But I beg you, as you do what is right, please never keep this person's essence or being out of your heart. And just this discernment has the power to shift heaven and earth. Another insight about this outer service, outer action, how dependent it is on inner action. In one particular conference, this African-American professor was telling that, did you know that every 28 hours, an African-American is being killed by state-sponsored violence? He says that's not the real problem. The real problem is the African-American is being murdered 1 billion times a day by the thoughts, the prejudices, the biases, the stereotyping we have of the other. Of course, legislation will help. Education is critical, but it's really a spiritual issue. The inner work, how do I overcome my biases that comes through my environmental, family, religious, social conditioning? A third one, you know what a big problem we have? The degradation of the environment. I love the words of Gus Speth, a very well-known scientist under Jimmy Carter, environmentalist scientific advisor, who said, for 30 years I've thought that the biggest environmental problems are loss of biodiversity, climate change, and ecosystem collapse. And that with 30 years of good science, we could solve them. Because now I've realized the biggest environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And scientists cannot solve them. It's a spiritual issue. All this by way of saying the work, which we call the inner pilgrimage, the inner work, those spiritual practices are critical. But it's inconvenient. That's why it's called practice. It requires us to practice. So, how do I awaken to my divine spark. Briefly, the traditions say, in Sufism we say, you have to do the work of transforming the ego from a commanding master into a personal assistant. And how do you do that? So let's talk about one technique, die before you die. Another one Prophet Muhammad has said is, know thyself and you shall know thy sustainer. Get to know yourself. You know, I always tell Mullah Nasruddin stories. Here's one which we have said earlier, but I think it's very relevant in these times. The Mullah is going to give a grand party. He needs a huge pot to cook his food. He doesn't have one. Goes to a neighbor's house. The housewife, is obliged out of the rules of hospitality to give it to him reluctantly. But the next day, the Mullah comes back with two pots, a big one and a small one. She says, what's a small pot? She said, madam, didn't you know? Your big pot was pregnant. She says, yeah, I kind of thought so. Thank you so much for this beautiful pot. The Mullah comes next month, and this time she's so eager to give the large pot, but then the day after, the week after, no Mullah. The housewife goes, Mullah, where's my pot? She says, he says, didn't you know, madam, that your pot was pregnant? It died in child delivery. Housewife says, impossible, how can a pot be pregnant? He says, you believed it the first time. This is very relevant because do we speak and act on the truth or on the truth of convenience? Self-witnessing. How do you open up the heart? Many practices. A very popular one is, very important one is to really embrace not only your 10,000 joys of life, but also your 10,000 sorrows of life. Every feeling is just energy, begging to be acknowledged, healed, and integrated. As Carl Jung said, will you have the courage and the grace once in your life to kiss the demons and dragons within you? That's how they turn into a prince or princess. Our anger transforms into enthusiasm, a lot of vigor. Our fear becomes transformed into mindfulness. Very quickly, in Sufism, we say that it is very important also to develop a relationship with yourself based on compassion. Because every relationship outside of myself is a reflection of the relationship I have with myself. See, a wonderful technique is sacred naming. You know, we're having all those inner thoughts. We're talking to ourselves continuously. And the sad thing is, a lot of those inner talk is negative. So when you find yourself having that negative thought, do a spiritual intervention. By addressing yourself by a word or sentence you have chosen to add to your name. Like I, for example, always call myself Brother Jamal. Because whenever I say Brother Jamal, it evokes that feeling of compassion and mercy. Another technique very popular in Sufism is to tell your heart words of beauty like, I love you, or please help me to love you. Please help me. I need help. I surrender to you. You see, there's a wonderful verse that came to the Prophet Muhammad where God says to each one of us, oh beloved one, I cannot be contained in the space of the earth. I cannot be contained in the space of the heavens, but I can be contained in the space of the pure, loving heart of my devotee. So this part of the human body is actually infinite, boundless. And if you keep telling your heart in your meditative time, as also in your waking hours, I love you, with that feeling, with that humility, you connect to a divine vibration that loves you, blesses you, heals you, and transforms you. Okay, I'm looking at my time very fast. This is the month of Ramadan. Ramadan refers to two things. One is the month the 9th month of the Islamic lunar calendar, also the practice of fasting. Why do they fast in that month? Because it was in that month that Prophet Muhammad, as he was meditating in the mountains, he received the first verses of the Quran. So to express gratitude in this particular month, Muslims make a vow to purify themselves and to do a lot of prayers and become a better human being. And Islamic prayers are based not on supplications only, but mostly on praising God and thanking God. So I'll say one more mullah story. The mullah is imprisoned in jail for life, but he's suddenly very happy because he has heard that his teacher has permission to visit him. Why is he happy? He's sure the teacher will slip in a weapon or a key to escape. The teacher comes and just brings him a prayer rug. Have you seen prayer rugs? A lousy prayer rug. He says, big deal. He doesn't say that to him, but in his mind he's thinking. The teacher goes away. He's saying, what good is this for me? I'm in prison for life, but he has time on his hand. He starts, Allahu Akbar, oh God, the greatest of the greatest, most compassionate. As you say, and as Muslims say, he bows, he stands up, he prostrates. May I let go of my ego? That's why they prostrate on the ground. When they sit up, it's what remains of me when my ego is diminished. He doesn't mean a word of these words of praising God and thanking God. But as the days and weeks and months go by, he looks closely. He realizes there is a design, a special design in the prayer rug. It's a design of an escape route from the prison. The inner work of the power of praising God, of thanking God, of what Buddhists, I've shown this story to Buddhists, they say it's about mindfulness. Can you be present with God as you pray? The miracle is not to walk on water. The miracle is to walk on land, as they say. Or another Zen saying, when sitting, sit. When walking, walk. Above all, don't wobble. Be present. It's about silence. After prayers, Muslims sit in silence. Silence is not the absence of sound, it's the absence of the little self. Rumi says, silence is the language of God. Everything else is a poor translation. Can I be silent? Rumi says, be silent so that the Lord who gave you language may speak. For as he fashioned a door and a lock, he also made a key. So all this work, inner pilgrimage, it fulfills those requirements every religion says its purpose is. You become saved. You get mukti, moksha, you become freed. Hindu Buddhist tradition. In Islam, you become surrendered. I love best the word in Buddhism, you develop a sense of equanimity. So I guess one last story. On a moonlit night, this Buddhist monk's house is burned to the ground. There's a fire. And what does he do? He just gazes at the moon and says, finally a perfect view of the moon at night. And then, of course, if you are of service, I love Tagore's words, I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I served and lo, service was joy. No, I slept and I take it back. I slept and dreamt life was service. I served and lo, service was joy. So service is really joy. So I want to just end with the words of Prophet Muhammad who said, Jamal, I say it every time I come here, Jamal, when you arrived here, everybody was laughing and smiling, but you were crying and weeping. Live such a life. Do this inner work and the outer work. So when you leave, everybody around you is crying and weeping, but you are laughing and smiling. Thank you.